Good morning. It is 6:50 a.m. on Friday, July 21st, 2017. I'm Christiana Ellis and I just got up. This is 5 more minutes. So my friend Jared Axelrod on Facebook yesterday posted an interesting film appreciation rules challenge, I thought. The goal was to convey the feeling of the last 50 years of cinema by naming 10 films with the extra catch of being 5 directors with 2 films each, which adds to the challenge because there's lots of great movies that you might feel like you want to include, but you don't necessarily have 2 movies from that director that you want to pick. And then, of course, there's anytime you make a list like this, there's going to be a million that you have to leave out because the whole point of the fun of the exercise is narrowing it down in some way. So I had to take some time to think about it, but I've put together my list, and I'll add the caveat here that this is not necessarily like when I'm putting together this list, like how am I making the judgments? And it's not necessarily something where I'm saying, it's not necessarily something where I'm saying these are the 10 best movies. Because for one, we've already introduced an arbitrary rule that we have to pick 2 films from each director, right? So that's already eliminating it. But also, the request, the ask was convey the feeling of the last 50 years of cinema. That's not to say name the 10 best movies in the last 50 years. That's a different question, right? So, my list, and there's definitely a lot of heartbreakers that I had to ended up leaving off, but the list that I came up with and settled on starts with Steven Spielberg, and the 2 movies in particular are Jaws and Schindler's List. My first impulse was to have Jaws and Raiders of the Lost Ark, but part of what I want to include here is this idea of the span of what cinema can be, right? And obviously Jaws is a very different film from Schindler's List, but they're both Steven Spielberg. And Jaws is just, it practically invented the summer blockbuster. Um, and actually, hang on, I'm suddenly paranoid about something. Jaws came out in the time frame I'm talking about, right? Oh God, I can't think this morning. Okay, I'm pulling it up right now because otherwise I'm not going to be able to brain. Okay, 1975. So yeah, it would be 85, 95, 2005, 15. So yeah, it's 40 something. Okay, good. Oh man, God, can't talk. Oh, you know what? I could have. Anyway, Jaws. Jaws practically invented the summer blockbuster. It's got some serious stuff happening in it and with stakes and so on, but by and large, it's kind of light, just pure entertainment cinema. And it's just got some great techniques. It's perfect for a film appreciation class. So much good stuff going on there. And then Schindler's List shows like the weight and the impact that you can have. Plus, there's all this technique going on there in the sense of having it all be black and white with, like the rare exception, like the little girl with the red coat. Like, that's an interesting technique. And that's on top of having a moving story that's about a real historical period. And I'm sure it's fictionalized. I've never looked up the real Schindler, but based on real events. That don't, like they don't get any bigger than the Holocaust, right? And so having those 2 be the, not the ends of the spectrum, but certainly representing very different regions in this cinematic landscape, if you will. Next, I picked Hayao Miyazaki, who is a Japanese film director who directs animated movies. And of his movies, I picked Spirited Away and My Neighbor Totoro. Now, someone who's not familiar with the movies could probably say, well, don't those kind of have similar places? I would definitely agree that the two of those movies don't, not, unlike the two I picked for Steven Spielberg. Wow, I'm already, how long? I'm going to run through these a little quicker. They're not as, those two movies are not as different from each other as, say, Jaws and Schindler's List, but one of them is, Spirited Away is kind of more epic in scope by comparison, more of kind of an adventure story for the main character. Whereas one of the things that I love about My Neighbor Totoro is how small and personal the stakes are. Um, and what I love about both of them is that there's not really a bad guy. Like, there's some antagonists that shift over the course of the movie in Spirited Away, but the solution is rarely violence. And then in My Neighbor Totoro, there's really not even an antagonist. Like, the biggest fear at any point in the movie is that the younger sister has just gotten lost. But yeah, so those two movies are amazing, and I think they belong on this list. Next, the third director I chose was James Cameron, and of his movies, I really considered Aliens, and I love The Abyss, and it's one of my favorite movies for personal reasons. But what I actually ended up choosing is Titanic and Avatar. Not just because they're kind of the two biggest, financial successes, but because, again, they represent sort of different staked out, places within the cinematic landscape. Titanic being another sort of like epic retelling of a true history, and being a period piece and that sort of thing. And also just, that movie is great. Honestly, both of these movies, I think it's fair to have a backlash because so many people went nuts over them that to have some people want to say, oh, come on, they're not without flaws, that's fair. But I think it's also possible for the backlash to get out of proportion. I think both of those are great movies. Yes, they have their issues. That doesn't make them not great movies. But yeah, so Titanic, and then Avatar, partly for kind of bringing back 3D as a thing that people are paying attention to, even if it does still remain a gimmick a lot of the time. But also just the sheer volume of, that movie is really almost a CGI animated movie, period. Straight up, like there's some live action in it, but most of the time, what you're watching is 100% CGI, and yet it doesn't feel that way, and that's amazing. Fourth on the list, I have Ridley Scott with Blade Runner and The Martian. And once again, like The Martian, I love The Martian. I don't know that I would put it on a list of like top 10 movies of the last 50 years. But again, within the context of this movie or this list and the purpose of it, I think Blade Runner and The Martian are, again, good examples of the range of that particular director in the sense that they're both represent thoughtful sci-fi that have a real examination within each of them of technology's influence on society and how these two things are interlinked and cannot be separated. And I think both of them are good. And last but not least, I have Patty Jenkins, who I'll confess, one of the things that I wanted to make sure I was including here is at least one woman director, but that's more difficult because it's just there's really not that many comparatively in cinema history. I think it's fantastic that there are more and more as time goes on, but of course, when you're going about movies from the last 50 years, it's going to be less to choose from. And I also was kind of added an arbitrary restriction on myself that I wasn't going to include any of the same people from Jared's list. So, for example, uh, uh, um, the Wachowski sisters, and God, I can't talk. Catherine Bigelow. Those are some excellent directors. But what I really liked being able to include for Patty Jenkins is Monster and Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman, because I think it is a significant, notable achievement to have the first sort of uh, female heroine led superhero movie in a long time. People keep calling it the first, but that's really not 100% accurate. I don't think it diminishes Wonder Woman's achievement, um, but I mean, just like Supergirl. I will say it's the best one so far. I really love it, and certainly in the context of this current crop of superhero movies we've been seeing since the Marvel Cinematic Universe kind of came into being a thing. I think it is a great movie and a positive step moving forward for all sorts of reasons. And also, I just really, really liked it. But the other movie, a lot of people, is a lesser known movie, but it's a movie about a woman named Eileen Wormos who killed a bunch of people back a few decades ago. Um, and she was really just kind of a strange character, and had very complex reasons for what she was doing, and it was a very interesting sort of character study. Also interesting for featuring Charlize Theron, who's obviously a very beautiful movie star film actress, but in makeup that made her really look, I'm very different. And it was kind of an interesting makeup achievement and decision, of course, to cast a very beautiful actress and then make her not beautiful in the movie. Interesting. Um, but also, it's a good example of kind of a smaller character-driven movie, exploring things that most blockbusters would never touch with a 500-foot pole. So that's my list, and now I got to get ready for work. So I'll talk to you guys tomorrow for 5 more minutes.